Welcome to Town Politics, where we are bringing together journalists, activists, organizers, everybody to talk about the issues that are really happening in Oakland and what is it really happening in Oakland. But listen, I'm Pecolia, one of your hosts, and here is
Chaney.
and we're here today talking with Jeremy. Welcome, Jeremy,
Yeah, I appreciate it.
who's
Thank
the
you.
executive director of Phoenix Project. Whoop whoop. And today's episode is on one of my favorite subjects, although it's not my favorite subject. But we got to talk about money and politics. We got to talk about the conservative plot. We got to dive into what is all this effort and organizing trying to combat here in Oakland. So I can't wait to see how we have so much fun. Ooh, we're going to talk forever, ever.
A good time. Good times will be had.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but thank you for joining us. We are definitely excited to have this conversation. Want to start it off. There's a targeted campaign right now to convince Oaklanders in Bay Area right now that residents are not safe.
Right.
And a lot of campaigns are being led by fear, pumping fear into people that Oakland isn't safe, and we need all of these conservative policies. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Glad to be here and excited to get into the conversation. I think that, part of what we've seen both in San Francisco and also in Oakland is like the pushing forward of like a doom loop narrative. And so when I talk about doom loop, I mean, basically it was an idea that was taken from economic theory about if, the tax base moves away, people stop coming back to downtown, all of a sudden then that's going to trigger an economic issues that then become problems for the tax base, and then all of a sudden services can't get funded, and that becomes this like doom loop cycle. But how we've seen like the right in Oakland and also the right in San Francisco kind of take that narrative and run with it is by sort of taking it and just like applying it broadly to issues with the cities generally. So saying all of a sudden doom loop is synonymous with homelessness, doom loop is synonymous with crime,
Right,
doom loop
right.
is synonymous with all the problems that you're seeing in the city. And then using that as like a tool to then attack progressives and saying, oh well, this is all progressives' faults. It's progressive policies that have caused the crime, progressive policies that caused the homelessness, have caused all the issues that we see. And so therefore the anecdote to the doom loop is to do tough on crime policies, is to criminalize homelessness, is to clean sweeps to get rid of push the problem kind of into the jails, into the prisons, and like metaphorically under the rug in some ways. And so there's you've seen that narrative being pushed by the right wing influences within the city. I think in particular you can call out people like Sam Singer, who is like the spokesperson for the Oakland Police Officers Association, the OPOA, who great piece on him in Mother Jones, calling him the merchant of bad vibes. But the way in which he's connected into this larger political ecosystem of the right in Oakland specifically, but also in San Francisco, helping to push that narrative forward of saying we're going the wrong direction. Doom loop is here. It's all progressives' fault. It's all this soft on crime kind of approaches, progressive DAs, progressive economic and social policies. And so as I mentioned before, the anecdote to that is to crack down on people, which I'm not a policy expert on that end of the spectrum, but I know that consistently it's been shown that tough on crime policies have been ineffective at actually solving the social problems that we're seeing across the country as it relates to crime and homelessness. So in root cause analysis.
Yeah. And I think what's important is just that point, right? So we have this spectrum, right? On one side, we have what we would call progressives, or even some would say radicals. And on the other side, we have the conservatives. And I think it's important for us to just, say, like, progressives are saying, look, the status quo of how we've been addressing some of our problems, our social problems, in not only Oakland, but across the Bay Area it's not working, right?
Yep.
It's not producing the economic benefits that we really want to see it produce. It's
Right.
not producing the social conditions that we want to see it produce. It's not even producing the environmental conditions we want to see produced, right? So I see a progressive as someone who not only is advancing justice, but also someone who's saying, look, on these particular issues, whether it's economic justice, workers need to make a minimum wage that's
Mhm.
livable, that they can afford to pay their rent, that they can afford to take care of their basic needs, food, shelter, water, right?
Right.
Duh. And
Mhm.
then, we deserve to not be in neighborhoods where there's massive pollution. We deserve to not be you know, criminalized because of our identity, because of our gender, because of our racial, backgrounds, right? And I think that's one that we don't talk enough about, right? The Bay is the home of a massive, important LGBTQ movement, right?
Mhm.
And progressives are saying, look, that you deserve to be just as much equal in the society as anyone else, heterosexual. What's up with that, right?
Mhm.
And so, we can go on and on about, Medicare and access to healthcare. We can go on and talk about renters' rights and the fact that you shouldn't just be evicted because you fall behind on rent because probably you don't get your economic justice that you need,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. But that's what progressives are really about, right?
Right.
And then we got these conservatives who are like, you do what you stand on your own feet. Government has no role or responsibility to address the conditions that are a result of capitalism,
Mhm.
a result of this massive wealth, taking out of our communities, because that's what capitalism is. We're gonna extract not only raw materials but labor and not pay a fair wage for that labor. We're gonna pollute the environment and get away with it because we don't want to have any accountability.
Mhm.
And we're also going to continue to vilify that you're poor because we don't want you to ever have the ability
Mhm.
to say that we have a responsibility for the conditions of not having a full, an economy where everyone can be fully employed, right?
Right.
Because at the heart of capitalism is the idea that you can't have a fully employed economy,
Mhm.
right? And we're going to keep paying you the lowest amount of money possible so we can make the biggest profit.
Right.
So I just want to say that because I think to get into this conversation about why there is this conservative plot, right, to
Right.
really extract and to ensure that the most profit is made across a number of different issues here in the Bay
Yes.
Area, right,
Yeah.
and that they are using that plot and buying politicians, buying businesses, buying land in order to advance that plot. And the money in politics is just one symptom of ultimately how much profit they can make and do make here in the Bay,
Right.
right? And I think like it's insidious for us to like not talk about it when we live it, we breathe it. It's in
Mhm.
our conversations every day, but we don't really take stock and pause and be like, wait a minute, if this is the plot, and these folks are in government and in the streets, in these organizations trying to prevent it, why aren't we siding with the folks fighting for our best interests?
Mhm.
Right? What makes that so difficult?
Right. Right.
I think that when we talk about public safety and people's uh, overall well-being, uh, feeling safe, it's become personal.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
so a few years ago, we all were aligned that Black Lives Matter,
mm,
Mhm.
right? We wanted to see divestment in overfunding in police
mm,
and more funding to heal communities.
Right.
And within 5 years, that's changed.
mm,
Um, the right took a lot of our messaging and turned it against us,
mm,
right? Used a lot of the same tactics. And we're at a moment where, well, my car window got broken. So, you know, I'm done.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna align with some of these policies that criminalize people because I've been impacted.
Right.
But it's the usage of the media. So when we're talking about narrative,
Mm,
Yep.
for all 2.5 years, all we heard about was retail theft and bipping.
Yeah.
Mm.
That's all that Oakland was known for.
Mm.
Every day. You could not, on KTVU, Chronicle, Twitter, wherever you go. And so that's been embedded into people's psyche.
Mm.
And they believe that they're not safe because of unhoused people,
Mm.
right? And put the blame on unhoused people. They agree that our toothpaste should be locked up.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone, but
Right, most basically.
we've been conditioned to believe that overcriminalization and police is going to keep us safe
Yeah.
rather than policies that invest in healing,
Mm.
job creation,
Mm.
better schools and
Yeah.
access to education, and clean streets. That's actually what keep people safe. But the narrative has changed so much, and people who might feel that they identify as a progressive or a liberal, when it came to the primary election or the presidential election, people didn't vote that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Mhm.
how we got 36,
Yeah.
Prop 6.
Mhm.
Clearly, people weren't educated too much on the issues, but I think taking their own personal experiences to the voting polls and voting in favor of slavery and voting in favor of incarcerating people for stealing some toilet paper.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting scenario here where it's like uh, there's a bait and switch going on a bit, because I think that on one hand, for progressives especially, it's like it doesn't actually get us anywhere to pretend that problems are not problems. So like the right will be like, this is a problem and this is a big issue, and the way to solve it is by over criminalizing communities. The way to solve it is by investing in the police. And then oftentimes you have a problem within the left will be like, oh well, it's not a problem. This is not an issue. This is not happening. And I think that like ultimately, like to be able to recognize when issues are issues. So it's like, all right, so like when people are, you know, like property crime is increasing. Okay, let's say like there is, we saw, and this is the thing is that we saw that across the country. Like crime rates did go up like when the stimuluses like stopped coming in and people joblessness like increased like massively. I think a lot of people who worked whose jobs went remote didn't realize that it was only about 20% of jobs in the country that actually went remote during the pandemic. And at the same time, people were like, "Oh, like all the jobs were remote." Like now, like 20% of the jobs were remote. Like a lot of people were just laid off or struggling to be able to like work in person.
Right.
And so, and a lot of people were still having to figure out how to send their kids to school, all this stuff. So there was a lot of struggling that was happening during the pandemic, and I think that like you saw across the country, right? Like I'm saying, like when the stimulus stopped coming in, people being in desperate situations, property crime increasing, and the catch is that the same time that we were seeing crimes increasing in like Oakland or San Francisco, we were also seeing it increase in places that had conservative district attorneys and conservative governments, like in Sacramento. Sacramento has one of the toughest on tough on tough crime DAs. During the pandemic period, and crime rates increased higher there than they did in San Francisco or in Oakland. And so it wasn't about like the way that the conservatives are trying to chalk it up. They're like, oh, well, look at these cities that are led by Democrats, and it's all because of the Democrats is like being soft on crime is why it's increasing. But actually, it was a phenomenon happening across the entire country. In every city across the country, regardless of if you had a conservative or if you had a liberal running it, and regardless of how tough on crime the district attorney was, or restorative the district attorney was, you still saw these increases. And so it's more the economic determinators on the macro scale that's causing the issues that we're seeing in our society. And so, and we once again know that those indicators are not changed based off of how tough on crime a district attorney is. Like it's not going to solve the root cause issues that we're seeing in our society. And so as such, it does bring us around to this like, okay, well, if you want to deal with the problems, you have to have analysis. You have to actually understand the bigger picture of what's happening.
Mhm.
But oftentimes mention the news, the news, if it bleeds, it leads, that old saying. It's like they would much rather cover stories and this is kind of how their industry works. Like, a shop gets broken into. There's a victim. There's a perpetrator. It's a personal story. And it touches, pulls at people's heartstrings. It's like, oh, this is a personal example of an issue that happened to an individual. But what the news does not do well is analysis. Big picture. So this is happening. This is the trend. So what's the big picture? Why is this happening? How can we understand this in context of the larger society? And they don't do that well. And so I think that we often are left in a situation as individuals where we have a lot of information, but we don't have a lot of analysis. And not many people are actually helping us to understand why it is that things are going on and to bring us into the analysis bit. So that's part of what we try to do with the Phoenix Project is like, not just talk about here's the money in politics, but talk about like the larger picture of like, why are, corporate real estate and tech billionaires, like why are they spending big money? What are they getting out of this? And what then do they gain by pushing these kind of tough on crime narratives to benefit their interests?
Yeah. Well, that's a excellent segue into our next topic. And to your point, California has the toughest crime policies in the country. And a lot of people don't know that. But when we're talking about the narrative, um, it's being led by people that's not even from Oakland. We have individuals who are investing money into a lot of elections. Money in politics right now in the Bay Area in California is a big deal. And so from the media side, you have folks like Sam Singer, who is pushing the narrative that Oakland isn't safe. And then on the political side, you have individuals like Philip Dreyfus, who does not live in Oakland, who's not from Oakland. Um, People like Max Hodak and other folks who are investing a lot of money into county and city elections to elect or to push individuals that they feel would carry their messaging around Oakland not being safe. Um, and corporate real estate as well. And so we're in this moment where outside money is trying to really influence what's happening here, but there's no connection with locals, uh, longtime organizations that's been doing the work around rapid response and making sure that people are safe and housed. What do you feel that the people who are investing, what return are they expecting from these investments?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that like on the bigger picture, like gentrification as a policy, like I think it's really important to couch gentrification as a system as policies that occur in order to benefit corporate real estate, and their backers as well as other kind of related industries. And so, yeah, I think that when you look at historically in the Bay Area, and we're talking about like making it easier to see left from right, in a way, like, what is progressive, what is conservative. Um, yeah, when you look at the bigger picture, corporate real estate's always been funding the right wing of Bay Area politics for decades and decades and decades. As long as there's politics here, corporate real estate's always funded, things that benefit their interests, which are classist and racist, fundamentally. Helping to support redevelopment, helping to support gentrification, helping to support redlining, helping to support policies that prevented Black people, that prevented people of color, that prevented Jewish people from being able to rent in large parts of Oakland, and not that long ago. This is only a few decades ago.
Right.
I have my grandmother telling stories about it's like, yeah, like, a lot of neighborhoods we couldn't move into because we were Jewish and there was a clause, that prevented Jews from living in this neighborhood.
Right.
Like, we're not talking about that long ago. And that was all backed by the corporate real estate
That's
industry.
right.
Mm-hmm.
Up into the 80s, right?
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And still is legalized through different other measures that they've done although they cannot explicitly discriminate against people. They
Right.
can't say, oh, this is this is a green zone neighborhood and therefore, black people cannot live here. They can't say that legally, but they can find other ways to discriminate against people based off of lending, based off of pricing, credit, etc. So that all being said, so there's always been this interest from corporate real estate to find ways to make more money off of the city and do that through these racist and classist ends. And invest in politics is like one tool to make that possible.
Mm-hmm.
But you're seeing this interesting development happening the last 5 years, and like really in Oakland the last just 2-3 years, where you have these tech billionaires that are also throwing big money now into local politics. And part of the problem is that we're living, nationally, we're in this post Citizens United reality. So Citizens United passed legal decision 2013 that basically said that PACs and super PACs are allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money in politics. And that's locally, that's nationally, all across the board. So although you might have cities like Oakland that have ordinances that say you can only give so many hundreds of dollars to a candidate running for their election, you're at the same time allowed to have an independent expenditure PAC, independent organization that theoretically says we're not in communication with the candidate. Don't worry, like we have a firewall with the candidate, but at the same time are putting out advertisements, are even as of this last year allowed to run canvassing operations and other very explicit campaign operations to support specific candidates for office. And so those political action committees can legally, based off of the Supreme Court decision 2013, bring in unlimited amounts of money to support their candidates. And who does that favor? The people with the big money, of course.
That's right. I think one thing I just want to point out too, because a lot of people don't understand the role of Supreme Court in this plot, right? That we've had for many years now, much conservative Supreme Court, particularly coming out of the Reagan era, right? So you have Reagan coming in and saying, well, we can't legally redline anymore. So what do? We create the credit system, which is the racial system, and we can have a whole episode on that. We have the banking system really getting called out on its racial, dynamics as well. And so they're finding new ways to kind of demonstrate that they have some products available for low income folks, right? So that the rise of corporate real estate is somewhat stifled, right? And I think it's important for us to distinguish that like corporate real estate buys in mass, right? And so when we talk about gentrification, we're talking about that you can no longer afford a neighborhood that you grew up in. What we're really talking about is foreclosures, short sales, right? And we're also talking about the probate court, which we don't say enough about, right? And the fact that, every courthouse across the country, you can go and get a list of all the pre-foreclosures and foreclosures that are happening in your county. And at corporate real estate, what they do is they go and they get that list and they go and they buy as many properties as they can at every auction a county offers, right? And so the idea that you are then in the business of buying low, selling high, or renting as high as possible to make a profit is really at the core of what gentrification does, right? So like I grew up in the Mission in San Francisco. We paid rent was $294, right? Beautiful number. Wouldn't that be nice today? Just $200 of your money going to rent.
Right.
Beautiful.
Right.
Then, when we had to move, and this is just my story, it's the same story in Oakland because I moved to Oakland because I could afford to live in Oakland in 2003. But from 94 to 96, rents went from an average of $400 in San Francisco to an average of $600 to $800, right? Small but mighty jump because of the role of .com and the fact that .comers could get this influx of capital from investment firms, right, which is another tool of the tech and corporate real estate and a bunch of others pulling their money and birthing this idea that we can invest in these innovative businesses if we just have our firms pool our resources and decide who's the best entrepreneur to invest in.
Right.
And then we have also then them buying up properties and buying up lots, often empty lots, but also city property that was leased to them for very dirt cheap, right? And then we had that then raised property values in neighborhoods, right? Which then folks started refinancing their homes, ended up in predatory lending practices, loans that were just
shout out Wells Fargo.
Shout out to Wells Fargo, right? So then you had all these folks who had spent their hard working years in the 70s and the 80s, owned their homes that they bought for 10, 20, maybe 30,000. Paying very low property tax, refinance, because now they're being told they have equity in their property, right? And so I just want us to be really clear when we say corporate real estate's insidious agenda has really been to take as much property and land from working class people for as cheap as humanly possible via the courts, via the banks, with these refinancing loans, take the equity out of your property kind of dynamic, and then raising the property values within neighborhoods, particularly those formerly red line neighborhoods, in order to get people to participate in a new economic system that's still all about making profit, right? That is the birth of what a corporate real estate agenda has. It's the birth of the corporate, agenda, right? The conservative agenda. We got to take, and make sure folks stay engaged in this economic injustice system. So then to see and hear them then use their profit, which comes from those efforts, to then say, well, we're going to pick politicians and we're going to pick court justices based on their alignment to that, supporting that agenda. And all of a sudden give these political action committees, because that's what PACs stand for, the power to then spend an unlimited amount of our money. I want to make sure we clear the profit we gave them.
Right. Our rents.
Our interest rates on these high predatory loans, to then buy more politicians, buy more judges to keep this system alive. This is crazy. But that's the plot, right? That's the whole plot. We want to do this economic injustice, and we're going to buy people to make sure that system stays in place.
Exactly.
Crazy, right? But it is important for us to break it down, because sometimes people are like, oh, y'all are in a conspiracy theory. This ain't conspiracy. You can look up all of this, right? I can't buy. I haven't been able to buy in the Bay Area all my life. I done been qualified, pre-qualified, disqualified, unqualified, all the qualified. I might be putting too much of my business out, but
bunch of qualifiers.
Refinding, and I've gone through all these first-time homebuyer programs, and what has been so disheartening is to see, and I'll speak to one period of time in Oakland because it's so important pre-pandemic, summer of 2015. You're on Zillow, so Zillow comes up, it's a .com, it's like, hey, we're going to pull all these listings, and you have a pretty way to look at all the ways that folks do this stuff of selling homes. And I'll never forget that you could look at the pre-closures. And in Oakland, this is right after the first wave of foreclosures in 2008, 2009, but Oakland had a massive wave in 2015. In 2014, you could still find homes in Oakland for $250,000. I know it's shocking. You wish you could do that now, right? But in 2015, December 2015, we were qualified. We had pre-approval. We were in the search process. We were going, and there was just hundreds of homes in deep East Oakland, from High Street all the way to San Leandro to Durant, right? Who were all in pre-foreclosures, right? And I remember, asking my real estate agent, what in the hell is going on, right? And they were like, oh, this is the second wave of the housing boom here in Oakland. But what's so important about that is all of that property, the bulk majority got bought by one company, that company, Community Realty. And it's just crazy to me. One
Right.
company buying hundreds of properties up. There was another company that name is escaping me. That's also very did the same thing in LA, which they
Right.
also had the same dynamic happen
Yep.
of foreclosures, right? And
Yep.
so then
Brooklyn as well, which is
Brooklyn,
where I grew up. Yep.
yep.
And
And
across
so
the country.
there's this conversation not happening around the conservative agenda being so evident through
Yep.
real estate, right? And what that has meant for particularly Black and Brown communities, especially in Oakland, especially in San Francisco, but also in these cities that used to be majority Black, right?
Yep.
Particularly Oakland, which used to be almost 60% Black at sometimes, right? In our
Yeah.
census counts. Um, and so it's just so disheartening about how we disconnect. What we talk about all the time as family. So damn expensive to live in the Bay, but we don't connect it to like, hey, the wealth of this area has everything to do with land value and
Right.
everything to do with property. Anyway, I don't go on
No,
a rant for about it, but yeah.
no, 100%, 100%, and the predatory loans that also make it possible, right? Like, you had a lot of people who are single family home owners who own their properties, who all of a sudden then, they get, there's these predatory loans that were being given out by banks like Wells Fargo that have been sued, for tens of millions of dollars over racial discrimination at this point. But banks all across the country giving predatory loans to people to like refinance their homes, and disproportionately Black and Brown families, disproportionately mid-income families, lower
Mhm.
mid-income families that own their homes, who then had those homes stripped from them when they made one late payment or they
Mhm.
fell behind just a little bit,
Mhm.
to make uh, you know to negatively ultimately impact both their credit scores, but also having those homes stripped from them, and having that happen, on a massive scale. And it
Mhm.
ultimately was not until 2007, leading up to 2008, with the nationwide housing crisis,
Right.
that all of a sudden, finally, Congress and all of a sudden politicians who've been bought up by the real estate industry for so long finally were like, "Oh, we have to do something."
Yeah.
And really, it was because it was a problem that had been happening already for like decades, disproportionately to Black and Brown and like lower income homeowners. But then all of a sudden, it was becoming a problem for like upper middle class homeowners. All of a
Right.
sudden, it was becoming a problem for upper class homeowners who were also getting pulled into these predatory loans,
That's right.
and then they were getting their homes foreclosed, and then it became like, oh, now it's a problem.
That's right.
Right.
So it was and it was a huge transfer of wealth, exactly like you're saying, because all of a sudden you have these families that have been building up their wealth over decades, over
Mhm.
generations, with these homes, that they had across in different cities across the country, who then overnight watch those homes taken from them and sold at a fire sale to a corporate real estate investor,
That's
who then
right.
goes and buys them up. So you've seen since 2008 till now, BlackRock, which is a private equity firm,
That's
and other
right.
private equity firms across the country go from almost investing, little to no money or little to none of their portfolio in real estate, to all of a sudden real estate becoming their biggest investment.
Exactly.
BlackRock is now the largest landholder in the world, and they have properties all around the world.
That's right.
You know, as part of this venture. And there was a report, I think it was the Chronicle, that had a report that came out a few months ago about how the percentage of homes that are owned in different counties across the state by private equity. And you have certain counties where it's like 40% of the homes right now in those counties are owned by private equity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think in the Bay Area, it's like you have a range between like 10 to 20%, depending on the county, that are
Right.
just owned by private equity. That's not your mom and pop landlord. That's not families. That
Right.
is a corporation disproportionately based out of like Wall Street in New York City, that owns your home and is explicitly looking to just generate as much profit as possible.
That's right. So now the wealthy are just getting super rich,
Yes.
right? We've named some of them, right? These are the folks. These folks are the folks who became the biggest beneficiaries of this ploy, right? This conservative plot. So
Right.
now they're super rich. They don't live in Oakland, as Chaney was
Right.
saying. They're profiting off of manipulating people.
Yep.
And then they're starting these things called these AstroTurf organizations. So
Yeah.
Phoenix Project, we partner, Oakland Rising Action partner with you to really bring more light to, hey, we need to follow this money and how it's influencing our elections.
Right.
But tell us a little bit more about this connection between the super rich and these astroturf organizations. And then also, like, why should we be concerned?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, one of the things that you've noticed, so we've kind of laid out well at this point now the history of the corporate real estate interests, but then we also have now in the last 5 years these tech billionaires that also have collaborated now with corporate real estate to flood even more money into these PACs supporting these right wing candidates than ever before. So, and that collaboration they've done through what we term an AstroTurf network that sort of began, the framework for it began in San Francisco. In the last year or two, they've copied and pasted it over into Oakland, and we're seeing it spread throughout the Bay Area. And essentially, how it looks is the creation of a variety of organizations that will both have a nonprofit arm, a 501c3 and a 501c4 arm, as well as also a political action committee attached. And in collaboration, they use those entities to be able to take massive donations from these big money interests into the C3s or C4s that do not have to reveal their donors, as well as also into their political action committees, which do have to reveal their donors. But they work in tandem collectively to be able to push forward their political agenda. And and so they'll have these names that sound kind of nice, like in Oakland you've got Revitalize East Bay, you've got Abundance Network and Abundant Oakland, you've got Empower Oakland, all these groups that sound kind of like grassroots, right? Neighbors Together Oakland. It's like they sound like they're just trying to do what's right for the community or whatever. They don't sound like Gentrify Oakland or Displace Oakland, which might be a more apt name for some of these groups. But ultimately, they've used this kind of combined nonprofit political action committee setup to be able to then run candidates specifically. So not just donate money to candidates or support candidates, but actually create candidates.
Right.
Have candidates that they themselves are recruiting, that they are that will use their talking points, that they'll run their campaigns, and then they'll try to get them into office and actually have them implement their agendas. And that has been a particularly different flavor than you've seen in the past, where before, right, it was all about just how much, lobbying efforts or, campaign contributions that then they expect that after you contribute, that it'll turn around and benefit them financially. But now it's actually creating organizations that create their own candidates and run their own candidates who are then uniquely accountable back to those organizations that got them into office.
Right. And we've seen this increase of, AstroTurf groups, especially after the victory with Moms for Housing, right? And a group of mothers coming together and was able to win their case against a corporate, uh, a corporate real estate.
Right.
And we've also seen the increase of AstroTurf and their backing of certain candidates when during COVID, and we had our then council person Nikki Bass, who had authored along with uh, Carol Fife the eviction moratorium that kept people housed, and that really pissed
Real estate's
off.
not happy about that.
That
right.
really pissed off a lot of the corporate developers, to where we saw not just investment here in Oakland, but statewide, right, to prevent anyone that was for affordable housing into entering office or getting reelected.
Right.
And that, I feel, that was kind of the catalyst for the local orgs that we're seeing today. And when we're talking about, the change of narratives, right?
Totally.
And so can you speak on, some of the other groups that you've seen form since?
In the last couple of years. And since then, and to your point exactly, it is a reactionary development. It was because of progressive success that these big donors got so scared that like if things were going to keep on going the way they were going in between 2015 and 2020, and kind of hitting a peak with the Black Lives Matter movement, they're like, oh, if things keep on going this direction, we're in a lot of trouble. If you track this success of that 5 years from progressives for the next 20 years, they're going to be out of business. They're going to see their profits hit on considerably because of rental protections, because of tenant protections, because of affordable housing mandates or what have you. And so they push back hard. And so like I think the best example for Oakland specifically on an AstroTurf organization was what we saw this last cycle with Lauren Taylor's race, with the creation of the Black Action Alliance. It is like it really just hit the nail on the head in terms of an organization that's a political action committee that was founded and funded 100% by Philip Dreyfus, who is a person that you've referenced to, Piedmont investor. He put more money than any other individual into Oakland politics and into this AstroTurf network in this between both November and this last April's election. And so white Jewish man, he founded and funded Black Action Alliance, and specifically to make it seem as though, to do what we would think of as astroturfing, and astroturfing kind of being defined as fake grassroots, to make it seem as though, Lauren Taylor has the support of this community, when actually, and you can see that based off the name of the organization, but actually it's just Philip Dreyfus's money and a front, to help back the candidate that they want to have get into office. So I think that, Black Action Alliance was definitely one of them. But then, I mentioned before, Empower Oakland, Revitalize East Bay, and Abundant Oakland, which now combined into one organization for further cycles, as well as Foundational Oakland Unites, are all kind of good examples of groups that I would call AstroTurf that's happening right now in Oakland.
Yeah. Well, I think there are many of us who have a lot of opinions. I know we could talk about this issue forever and ever. Thanks so much, everyone, for everything we said. Let's do final thoughts as we wrap up. Again, such a powerful, powerful conversation about the role of how the wealthy became wealthy in the Bay, but also how they're using their wealth to really influence and push the conservative plot. Any last thoughts you want to share before we wrap up?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me. This has been great. I appreciate also just our collaborations continuously, the ways I've been able to learn from you both and all of your experience here in the Bay Area, fighting for progressive causes. I want to do a special shout out both to the Writers Come Out at Night, the book over here in front of me, Allie Winston doing great reporting, as well as Darwin Graham. And also Propaganda is another great resource by Alec Carcastanis. Came out this last year, and I think really hits well on a lot of the sort of points and topics that we were talking about today. So shout out to them both. But thank you both for having me.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the continued work that you're doing too.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for watching this episode of Town Politics. Woo! It was fire. It was fire. So we hope you learned something new, because that's the point. And we hope you keep listening and you keep on engaging. This podcast is hosted by Oakland Rising Action to show your support for this kind of educational and political content, because baby, it's getting warm. Please follow the podcast page on our YouTube, Spotify. We also are Oakland Rising on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. And sure enough, check us out on Reddit. We also have an IG broadcast channel. These are topics we don't want you to stop talking about. So get in there, get it done. And then stay tuned for next month's episode. We're very excited to have more conversations, but we definitely got to talk a little bit more about safety. So question for you to ponder on: how has public safety changed over time, and how can it be weaponized against our communities? So hope you come and join us for the next episode. Bye.
Ain't no power like the power of the people. We keep us safe, showing love to my equal. Ain't no power in the hour of the evil. Had to turn the news off, it never showing we peaceful. I had to turn the news off, they been pushing the peace. That propaganda, if you got it, I need some answers, so I'm asking the team. Changing the face of Oakland politics, they keeping it deep. Yeah. We politicking in the town, so you know it's going down, it's going down. We politicking in the town. If you ain't know, then I bet you know now, you know now.